back to Writing What I Like, Fieldnotes of a Black Woman Scholar. My name is Dr. Venus Evans Winters, also known as Dr. V, and I am the creator of Writing What I Like, Fieldnotes of a Black Woman Scholar. And today I want to reflect on the intersection of writing and mindfulness. And so today I have the courage, right? Because this is about vulnerability and the intersection of writing and mindfulness. And so, as you all know, for those of you who are returning, in this podcast, I like to explore the relationship between writing or research and writing, mindfulness and psychology of the mind, and also the intricate tapestry of who we are as social beings and as psychological individuals, right? So who we are from a psychological perspective. So I bridge together all of my worlds. Today, though, I want to take a deep dive into the interconnectedness of scientific theory, psychology, and writing, and how these elements can help to uplift ourselves as individuals, but also as human beings, as part of human beings who are part of larger social groups. So I want to explore how can we use writing to uplift ourselves spiritually and culturally, keeping in mind that we are in the middle of an academic crisis, we're in the middle of a mental health crisis, we're in the middle of an economic crisis, and some might say we're in the middle of a political crisis. Again, depends on who you ask. But anyway, so this field note was actually thought about because I believe this is my professional opinion. I believe that in our culture, especially in academia and higher ed and formal education, I believe that there's an overemphasis on writing for public consumption, privatization, profit, and individual pats on the back. Okay, so I said it. So I believe in the current cultural climate that there's been an overemphasis on writing for public consumption, privatization, and individual accolades. And I do think that many of us are getting caught up in this whirlwind of creating content, research and writing products, whatever you want to call it, that addresses somebody else's problem. So I believe that many of us are researching and writing on other people's problems instead of thinking deeply or diving deeply into our own personal growth and exposing our own greatest imaginations. So I have to give credit out to C. Wright Mills, the sociological imagination. I actually lectured on on the promise this week with undergraduate students, so I can't help but that's where that came from, the sociological imagination. But I do think that many of us are always thinking about or naming somebody else's problem instead of using research and writing to think deeply about our own personal growth and imaginations. But this trend, I think that it can overshadow the deeply transformative potential of writing when it's approached as a tool for personal healing and authentic, meaningful relationship building. So I ask in this field note, how can we reclaim writing as a vehicle for mindfulness and healing? And so I came up with three main emphasis that I want to share. And so this is my field notes, okay? So what I would do is I actually wrote this in my writing journal, my research journal. So one, I want to highlight in my field notes, or as I'm saying here verbally, I want to highlight the therapeutic power of writing. So let's think about that. So if you're listening to this while you're on a walk-in meditation, or if you just finished reading, right? If you just finished reading for your dissertation or whatever you're reading for, and you're listening to this podcast, you would write down or you would think about the therapeutic power of writing. If you're taking notes, highlight the therapeutic power of writing. But one thing I do want to emphasize is the therapeutic power of writing. Two, I want to emphasize writing as a cultural and spiritual journey. And I want to emphasize point three, the vulnerability of personal storytelling. So let's start with the therapeutic power of writing. So I know I probably confused everybody. So let me go back. So if you're taking notes on this podcast, hopefully you're not driving. If you're taking notes on this podcast, there are 3 points that I want to emphasize as we think about how can we reclaim writing as a vehicle for mindfulness and healing. So 1, I want to point out the therapeutic power of writing. 2, I want to briefly reflect on what would it look like if writing was a part of our cultural and spiritual health. Okay. And 3, I want to emphasize the vulnerability of personal storytelling. And then once we look at these 3 ideas very, very briefly, I'm going to raise some questions that we can write down in our research journals or our writing journals. So first, something I've been thinking about is the therapeutic power of writing. So obviously, as a clinician for almost 20 years, I do use a lot of journaling personally, but I also encourage people whom I work with to use journaling as a part of their healing process. And also, if you've ever come in contact with me as a professor, as a writing research consultant or coach, I'm always, advocating for us to journal, carry a journal, keep a journal in your purse, in your book bag, in your side pocket, in your car, in your luggage, right? So if that plane ever goes down, I'm going to have 2 things. I'm going to have me a pen and I'm going to have me a journal. Okay, and a couple books too, but that's because I'm a nerd. But anyhow, writing has long been recognized as a powerful tool for self-expression and healing. I just gave several examples from a clinical perspective and a research perspective. But when we write, we open up a dialogue with our inner self. So putting pen to paper or fingers to keyboard, however you write, journal, we use it to articulate our deepest thoughts and feelings. And I think that this act of writing is not just about creating content, right? Like articles or book chapters or lectures or blogs, but I also think it's about exploring our internal landscapes. So think about that, right? So when we're thinking about the therapeutic power of writing, how can we use our research, or how can we use writing to explore our own internal selves, right? So our internal, when I say internal landscapes, I mean the rough patches, the deep valleys, those shallow areas, right? Those highs, those lows, those intricate spaces. So I'm interested in how can we use research and writing, or writing itself, to explore who we are internally. And I do believe that mindfulness play an important role, here. I believe that mindfulness can play an important role in writing. So I believe by cultivating mindfulness, and by mindfulness, I mean very simplistically, being present in the moment. Because I know now in pop culture, we're using mindfulness all over the place. And so as a mindfulness meditation practitioner, obviously I have a sitting practice, I have a walking practice, I have a running meditation practice at this point. But from a more simplistic point of view, I would say mindfulness just means being present in the moment. So whatever we're doing, when we're speaking, when we're eating, when we're with our loved ones, our partners, our children, we're just in the moment. We're not in the past, we're not in the future. But I believe that by cultivating mindfulness, we actually are able to better tune into our thoughts and our feelings as they arise. And we're we're acknowledging these thoughts and feelings without judgment. And I think that's important. So you're in the moment. And so now, right, so I'm actually recording my Fieldnotes, right? I'm actually reflecting on my own teaching of the week. I'm actually thinking about some moments that I've shared with clients, but I'm in the moment as I'm recording this, and I'm trying my damnedest not to judge myself, right? So in that moment, in that mindfulness moment, I'm tuned into my thinking, I'm tuned into my thoughts, right? My thoughts, I'm tuned into my feelings. I would say I'm also tuned into my body. But the goal is not to judge, and that takes practice. That's why we call it a mindfulness practice or a mindfulness meditation practice, because I'm actually practicing being conscious. I'm practicing being in the moment. I'm thinking about my thoughts, but I'm also practicing the habit of mind of not judging my thoughts. Okay, so think about how mindfulness can help, how a mindfulness practice or being mindful can help in the research and writing process, in the writing process. And so mindfulness it allows us to write from a place of authenticity and presence. So this awareness, right? So mindfulness cultivates as a practice, it cultivates us being cultivating mindfulness, right? We're able to think about, we're able to tune into our thoughts, right? I feel like I isolate my thoughts, I isolate my feelings, and then I give myself the opportunity to think about my thoughts, to think about my feelings, but also suspend judgment. Okay, so I just want to make sure I'm being clear there. But this awareness, for me, it allows me to write from a place of authenticity and presence. And so that's what I'm trying to convey, to us as a community. So how can we use this awareness of our thoughts and our feelings to write from a place of authenticity, right? So truthfulness, honesty, but also presence. Like, this is what's happening now in the moment, and this is the urgency. For ourselves. So as we observe our thoughts and our emotions or our feelings, we gain insights into who we are. And so as we're gaining insights into our true selves and we're staying present in the moment, I think it helps us to navigate life complexity. So not just for ourselves, but also for the others. So those who are more vulnerable than we are. So the more that we know about ourselves, I believe, then we are able to engage in meaningful conversations, meaningful dialogue, meaningful reflections, and suggest more meaningful and compassionate solutions to some of social life's problems. But that starts with us. I think a lot of what's going on now, especially in academia, higher ed, in writing overall, right? Writing for public consumption and accolades, is that, or the formal writing process, I think what happens is that we begin to tune into the other before we tune into ourselves, right? And that's because, we're so afraid of being exposed. We are very protective of who we are, but we're willing to sacrifice other people's ways of lives and beings and putting them, under the looking glass as opposed to ourselves. Second, in this Fieldnote, I also want to, emphasize this idea of writing as a process for provoking or to fostering cultural and spiritual health. So imagine if we used writing as a tool. Imagine if we engaged in writing to improve our own cultural and spiritual health. So for me, I believe that writing, mindfulness, and spirituality, it can intersect to foster cultural health. We always think about, writing for the therapeutic or writing for healing, right? But I also believe that, writing, mindfulness, and spirituality can also help us improve upon our cultural health. So when we write mindfully, we create a sacred space where our cultural identities and our spiritual beliefs can intertwine and flourish. Yeah, flourish. So this mindfulness writing practice, it nurtures our spiritual health and it strengthens our connection to our cultural roots. And I believe that that's important. So I think now, especially with so much conversations in education, or even in social media around trauma informed, intergenerational trauma, transgenerational trauma, all this good stuff. I think that's there. Not only is there a focus on somebody else's problems and fixing the other, I think too that a lot of our scientific thought and writing has focused on fixing broken people, and in many cases too, turning a traumatic lens on ourselves. I don't know if that's a thing, but we do talk about our own individual experiences with trauma, and we impose it on other people, but that's fine, right? So we're bringing awareness to mental health and destigmatization of mental health. But I think too, even more importantly, we can use writing to open up, larger conversations about culture and the role of culture in sustaining our overall mental and emotional and psychological and social health. So I do believe that when we connect writing to our cultural roots, I think we also contribute to a larger conversation about the human experience, about human diversity. Rather than focus on writing for public approval or profit, right, or these what I call pat on the backs, we can also shift our emphasis towards engaging in writing communities or individual writing that promotes understanding and empathy, right? So this idea of when we write in our own tongue, when we write about the realities of our own social cultural context, then I think we're able to contribute to a larger conversation about the diversity of the human experience. uh, we're also able to talk about, through a cultural lens, we're also able to use writing as a way to illustrate human agency, as evidence of human resilience, also the vulnerability across social groups, cultural groups. But I think that the way that we do that is that we engage in writing from an authentic cultural perspective. So instead of trying to write in other people's tongue or trying to write from the perspective of other people's cultural context, we write from the perspective of our own tastes, our own norms, our own values, our own beliefs. We engage in our writing about our own rituals. Hell, writing itself can become a ritual that's a part of who we are culturally. But we have to have the courage to heal culturally and collectively, but we also have to have the courage to write culturally in order to document our collective humanity. And so anyway, I kind of digressed. And the reason why I digressed there, and wanting to emphasize that writing is a part of our cultural and spiritual health, I emphasize that because many of us, especially those of us who identify as African, Indigenous, and as people of color, keep in mind that many of us are writing through the lens of somebody else's cultural context. We are engaging in theories that is not necessarily reflective. That is not we're basically writing and engaging in theories that aren't necessarily reflective of who we are as a people. So we're always thinking about who we are as individuals from the perspective of the other. Some people call it the colonizer. But some people too fear thinking and writing from their own cultural perspective because they're trying to survive someone else's cultural realities, whether that's in the workplace, whether that's in the classroom, or whether that's even in their leisure time. So think about that, right? So who's judging our research? Who's judging the futility of our research? Who's judging the validity of our research? Who's judging how we write and what we write, right? It's usually through someone else's cultural perspective. So we have to dare to write culturally and spiritually if we're going to engage in meaningful research and writing practices, right? I know that's a lot and it sounds redundant, but I think it's very, very important to emphasize, if not overemphasize. But okay, so anyhow, next, the next point that I want to think about in this Fieldnote is this idea of the vulnerability of personal storytelling. And I just think that, again, I'm going to say it again just for those of you who are taking notes. I want to reflect on the vulnerability of personal storytelling. So for me, even writing this Fieldnote, sharing this podcast is vulnerable. It takes vulnerability to tell my story, as a professor, researcher, clinician, solopreneur, health and wellness coach, meditation practitioner, right? So this is a moment of vulnerability through verbal storytelling. But anyhow, I think for me that one of the most powerful aspects of mindful writing is the vulnerability that it requires. I found that sharing my personal journey and my internal thoughts, it can be stressful, it can be daunting, but I think that it's through this vulnerability that we're able to create and build authentic relationships and find creative solutions to social problems. So that's the reason why I'm able to take my field notes, my writing notes, my journal notes, and turn them into an entire public episode, right? And so, in my belief, when we write about our own experiences, we invite others. I'm inviting you, right? We invite others to see the world through our eyes. I'm inviting you to see the world through my eyes. This act of sharing our writings, it can actually, not just our writing, but our inner thoughts, right? Writing our inner thoughts. This act of sharing can bridge gaps. It can foster empathy, and it can stimulate dialogue. So, in a world that often values, in my opinion, surface level surface level conversations and content, to embrace vulnerability in our writing, it can actually lead to deeper connections and more meaningful conversations. Yeah, so hats off to those of you who actually send me a message or leave a note or comment, right, or email me about, these field notes. I appreciate it. And so, though, when we move away from these more superficial conversations, and we wholeheartedly embrace our vulnerability without judgment. I'm still a work in progress. And embrace vulnerability in our writing, then I do believe that we can engage in not only deeper thoughts or thinking, but it can lead to deeper connections and more meaningful, authentic conversations and relationships in our research, in our writing, and in our personal lives, as well as our work lives. And so, but anyhow, so again, I want to emphasize in this field note, one, yes, there is an intersection between writing and mindfulness. So I am advocating for research and writing that is connected to a mindfulness practice. And I think that a part of this is we have to recognize the therapeutic power of writing. I do believe that it's important to embrace writing as a part of our cultural and spiritual health. And three, I do believe that there's vulnerability in personal storytelling. And I think that vulnerability is very important and significant. Okay, so now that I've, I practice vulnerability and I've been, I wanted to really, really illustrate here that, mindfulness is important, and mindfulness, it can be useful, as we engage in research and writing for social justice purposes, right? For self-empowerment, but we also have to bring a little bit of ourselves into the research and writing process, or I would say we have to bring a lot of ourselves into the research and writing process. And so I invite you, I invite you to our audience of writers, thinkers, and healers. I invite you to contemplate the following questions as you dare to embrace writing as both a creative and a healing project. So, question number one, hopefully you're not driving. If you are driving, don't take notes. If you're driving, come back. Come back to this field note. So, one, a question that I have for you, and you're going to write this in your journal. How can I create a mindful writing practice that allows me to explore and express my deepest truths? Okay, that was a mouthful. Let me raise that question again. How can I create a mindful writing practice that allows me to explore and express my deepest truths? I like that question. That's a really, really good question. I think that's good for people who are on an intentional healing journey. But I think it's important for those of us who are researchers and writers. I think that could be a useful question in our positionality statements. I'll talk about positionality statements in another field note. Okay, so I don't want to, I could do a deep dive into positionality statements in and of itself, but that's a good question. How can I create a mindful writing practice that allows me to explore and express my deepest truths? I like that question. I'm proud of that question. Number two, reflective question number two. In what ways can my writing contribute to cultural and spiritual health, both for myself and my community? Again, in what ways can writing contribute to cultural and spiritual health, both for myself and my community? Or you can say communities, right? Question number three. Question number three that I want to raise. So something that we can be thinking about as we engage in writing as a healing process. Number three, how can I use my personal experiences? How can I use my personal experiences and vulnerabilities to build authentic relationships and address social issues creatively? That was a run-on sentence. Let me raise that question again. How can I use my personal experiences and vulnerabilities to build authentic relationships and address social issues creatively? Okay, that's not a run-on sentence. That's one of those professorship questions that I ask, and then students want to know why. I tell them to provide a 500 to 800 word essay response, but then they say, "Oh, Dr. V, I can't get it in. I have 5 pages." That's because that's a long question. Question number 3: how can I use my personal experiences and vulnerability? So we're just not telling you to put your SHIT on the piece of paper, your stuff on the paper, but also for you to, reflect, be vulnerable, right? Reflect on your vulnerabilities in order to build authentic relationships with your reader or yourself. But the goal, for us to think and write creatively and research creatively is so that we can address real problems that's affecting us in real time, okay? But we have to be honest with who we are, okay? So reflecting on these questions, I think that reflecting on these questions, it can actually help us align who we are as writers with mindfulness and healing and personal and collective growth. Because again, let's keep it real, y'all, because I'm gonna keep it real. Dr. V's gonna keep it real. Right now, we are in an educational crisis. We are experiencing economic crisis. We are experiencing a mental health crisis, right? And I think that we are experiencing, our own internal crises because the world is shifting, and we have a right to shift too. The world is shifting, so we have a right to shift too, to evolve. So let's reflect on these questions and let's see how, writing with mindfulness can also help us heal personally, but also collectively. So again, that's it. Thank you. Thank you so much for listening to Writing What I Like, Field Notes of a Black Woman Scholar. My name is Dr. V. Thank you for joining me on this journey into the intersection of writing and mindfulness. By embracing writing as a mindful, creative, and healing practice, I believe that we can transform not only ourselves, but also the world around us. So until next time, keep writing, stay mindful, and nurture your inner landscapes.